when I'm sitting on the floor, I've done something. This is a big deal. What is the biggest difference between all the work we just did trying to find a neutral spine and standing and the position I'm in right now? I flex my hips. And if you're having issues touching your toe, I want you to look at my femur right now. Other than the rotation, my knee is in the same spot. My hips are flexed. Yeah, my legs aren't out in front of me. But you see all these little crinkles here in the front of your hips? When you're sitting, all of those crinkles are still there because you're still in hip flexion. And so let's all do a little experiment. So get your block and have a seat on the floor. With your butt on the floor, so we're not going to elevate the hips just yet. All I want you to do is, with your butt on the floor, feet crossed however they can. Maybe you got a bum ankle or a knee and you can't cross that leg. That's perfectly fine. You can have the leg out. It's not a big deal. You're sitting on the floor. And I want you to try to sit upright, as crazily upright as you can. Whatever seated position you're comfortable in, doesn't matter. I sit as upright as I possibly can. Okay. And so then the question is, what is on in your spine? Remember, I said I want your back muscles slightly on. Said another way, if your back muscles are off, you're slouching. That's one of my easy definitions of slouching. We don't only have to look at spinal joint angles. We can just say, the moment your back turns off and you're in an upright position, you're slouching. You have angled the pelvis or repositioned the pelvis front to back so that you can not load the spine. That's how we slouch. And so the question is, when you're sitting on the floor and you really arch your chest up, okay, there's a little bit of work in your back, but what is hard for most of you to feel, when you sit your butt on the floor, can anybody feel hip flexors and abs? Raise your hand. It is a subtle thing. It's like a flavor. It's like, you know, like an after flavor. Like, what is that? You eat a really expensive cheese, and then there's like, what is that, cardamom? Like there's like other weird things going on. It's like the thing in the background, and it's this sense of work on the front of the body. And here's why. Go ahead and keep your feet on the floor. Take your knees up. Just pick them up. Not with your hands. Just hold them up. And here's the question. We asked this question Sunday, and it's not an intuitive question necessarily. Are you falling forward or are you falling backwards? You're falling backwards, aren't you? Now, what is on when you're falling backwards? It's your abs. Can you feel it? Abs and hip flexors. And we just define neutral as having your pelvis under you and your head over you in such a position that I have my back, it can turn on. Okay, now I get my block. Yeah. I pick the butt up. Now what is obvious is that I'm in profile right now. My hips are still flexed, aren't they? I still got all these pants crinkles here. No pants crinkles on the back of the butt. Now arch your chest up. First of all, it's easier to arch your chest up now, isn't it? Thumbs up. And part of what hopefully some of you are feeling is that as you really reach your head up, you actually get a stronger feel of a contraction in the back, and less of an overall feel of something on the front of the body, which we all now know is rectus abdominis and iliopsoas, holding you. And so this is actually the hard question to answer by feel. In this position, when you really arch your chest up, the head pushes straight up. When I elevate the hips, am I falling forward or am I falling backwards? I can absolutely fall backwards. Everybody lean your upper body back. You feel your abs turn on, don't you? Yeah. And if I lean just a little forward, abs turn off and the lower back turns on. But I could do that slouching. And so I'm actually looking, remember, I want to push the head straight up. I want to be as tall as I can be. But now I'm asking you a weird question. With your butt stuck to the floor, can you be taller? That is a weird question. But this is, I did it with my hips on the floor just as a challenge. I always recommend you elevate the hips. Now for those of you that are still sort of not with me and you're just like, I don't feel this falling forward thing, it's actually okay. We're going to examine hip flexion a lot. We're going to get really get hip flexion. Why this neutral thing. We actually talked through some of the exercises this Sunday, but we're going to get all through this as we get into back bends, as we get into the issues of back bending and hip flexion. Why sitting is such a hard position. But the last thing I'll say about this is, imagine that your butt is, you're actually sitting at the edge of a secret door, trap door on the floor. Broadway stage, and there's a trap door in the floor, and it falls down. And your butt is on the regular floor, but your knees are actually on the trap door. If the trap door disappeared under your knees, would you fall forward or backwards? Yeah, and you want to get that. I'm actually, even though it's not an extreme feel, if my hips are elevated, I am 100% falling forward, which gives me this opportunity to actually slightly create this duck butt load where my butt can be slightly behind me and my head can push up and I can feel my back. Now, if you're not used to this, this is exhausting. Like your back within 32 seconds will be exhausted. I took like a year off for meditation. I sat upright regularly, but I didn't sort of formally meditate. And during this period, I moved a bunch. So when we moved into this house, this is the 23rd time I moved, was when I moved in this house. So I've moved a lot. And I had recruited a bunch of scapular elevation and sort of hadn't dealt with it. It was fine. I wasn't getting neck crooks, but I decided I would sit meditation and literally arching up, and just the weight of my arms pulling the scapula down was extremely painful, because the platysma, upper trapezius, levator scapulae, and scalenes all got so tight that just literally my shoulder, I wasn't pulling them down, just the weight of my arms, I would have pain radiate all through my collarbone up into my head. And meditation was me just sitting there for 10 minutes dealing with how painful my neck and shoulders were. I would just let the sensation wash over me, and I would literally like hallucinate colors because it was so uncomfortable. But that's how tight this stuff can get. So remember, if we spend all day like this, yoga teacher says to stand up straight, this is not neutral. This does not feel like neutral. And so think about what reading pose is. If you're standing and you were in reading pose, your chest would point to the ceiling and your arms would look like this. This is a pretty extreme back bend. And so if I'm comfortable in reading pose, like if I do a back bend over the block or I go into reading pose before I sit in this position, neutral is going to, a more upright position will feel more neutral.